After nearly 3 years of court-ordered silence, Google finally steps forward and admits to Wikileaks that they gave the feds all of their emails, subscriber lists, metadata, and what they described as other information. Google sheepishly admitted to handing over the data even after publicly rebuking the feds for violating privacy. Now it appears that they willingly participated in the feds' crackdown on free speech and private conversations. What we don't know is whether or not Google tried to fight that search warrant in court. Regardless of Google's level of participation, this only further proves that the federal government is engaged in an all-out war to stop any and all leaks from getting out to the press. We're seeing the same thing play out in Virginia, where in a courthouse where the feds indicted former CIA operative Jeffrey Sterling on all 9 charges, even though the prosecution submitted no real evidence that Sterling leaked information to reporters. Both of these cases come together to send one clear message to journalists and whistleblowers alike. It is not safe to take a stand against your government. For more on these stories, we return to investigative journalist Wayne Madsen. Wayne, it's great to have you back on the program.
Good to be with you.
Wayne, after learning about this search warrant, would you say federal employees or government contractors are more or less likely to report wrongdoing?
Oh, there's a huge, all I can say is a chilling factor in Washington today because we even heard this from Gary Pruitt, the president of the Associated Press, after revelations of spying by the government on reporters' phone calls and emails. Everyone's hesitant to talk. Even in casual conversation. I used to regularly have conversations with people that work at the State Department and at the Pentagon, and that has all. And these individuals weren't trying to impart some sort of inside information to me. It was just casual conversation. It sometimes might touch on events around the world, but they're not even doing that anymore because they're too afraid that they could face some sort of indictment because there'll be some FBI agent knocking at their door saying, "Hey, we spotted you talking to so-and-so from such a news organization, and by the way, you're under arrest."
Yeah, Wayne, I'm getting images in my mind here of the film Goodfellas or Casino. I forget which one it was, where the main characters had to hold their hand over their mouth to cover the lip reading from the federal agents who were watching them.
Yeah.
Is that the state of the free press that we have here in the United States now?
I'm afraid it is. It was never all that secure. I can recall during the W. Bush administration, and even during part of the Clinton administration, having to go to extraordinary means to talk to sources face to face. Obviously, you never want to communicate anything over email or the telephone because that's fair game for NSA, the FBI, and the others. But individuals would go to extreme lengths to avoid being spotted by agents. I've met sources in the woods, in wooded, secluded areas. I've even met them in open areas like behind a chain link fence of a ballpark. Little League ballpark, because the chain link fence would somehow interfere with those shotgun microphones that the FBI has been known to use to pick up conversations from afar. Same kind of microphones they use during sporting matches. So yeah, people knew about it, but they're not even willing to go to those lengths now. They just are cutting off all contact with the media.
Wayne, this is definitely a frightening prospect for the future of the free press. But, our government, they condemn North Korea and Cuba for holding political prisoners or cracking down on political dissidents. Yet, we just saw a federal court convict a CIA operative on very weak evidence that he leaked information to a reporter. And then at the same time, Julian Assange and Edward Snowden are both essentially political prisoners hiding away in other countries for fear of coming back and answering to the United States government. What kind of message is the U.S. sending to its citizens and other world leaders about freedom of the press?
Well, we're totally hypocritical when it comes to this. I can recall talking to the reporter who received the information from Jeffrey Sterling, Jim Risen from the New York Times, and the government was also until very recently, trying to get him to testify about his source before a grand jury. And although the Attorney General, Eric Holder, decided not to try to get Risen to name his source, he still was called before the grand jury to ask questions around that topic of who was your source, and that sent a chilling message to the media, to the Fourth Estate, to the press. I think people should realize that there's only one profession protected by name in the Constitution, and that's journalists, because it's in the First Amendment. It says, the freedom of the press will be guaranteed. It doesn't talk about the freedom of doctors will be guaranteed, the freedom of lawyers, the freedom of firemen, the freedom of stage actors, freedom of the press. Yet the government has gone out of its way to try to restrict this freedom. And the Obama administration, I'm afraid, which has brought at least 9 criminal charges pursuant to the 1917 Espionage Act, which was enacted by President Woodrow Wilson because he wanted to stamp out any opposition to his desire to go to war with Germany. He would brook no internal dissent in his administration. We've seen at least nine indictments, and that is more than all of Obama's predecessors, including Woodrow Wilson, combined. So it's amazing that this is not a transparent administration by any stretch.
Wayne, I've often thought that, okay, if the government's going to go ahead and start to slowly erode at freedoms, as long as the freedom of the press is there, it serves as a release valve for the people to speak, for the people to get a message out, and hopefully affect change throughout the nation. But with free speech being oppressed, that pressure can build up and people will act out. Do you think that by shutting down these avenues, by creating this chilling effect, we're coming one step closer to perhaps a revolution in this nation?
Well, I don't know if people are even educated or informed enough to be driven towards wanting a revolution. The other issue here is that with the new media, the government wants to determine who's a journalist and who isn't. And the recent conviction and sentencing of Barrett Brown, who was associated with Anonymous, I believe, and WikiLeaks and a few other operations. He argued he was a journalist, but the government determined he wasn't. And now we see people like John Cornyn in this Republican-led Senate for a long time has been talking about the government deciding who's a journalist and who isn't, and basically licensing journalists. So if you're licensed, of course, the idea is you'll only be licensed if you're with like MSNBC or CNN or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. But if you're running a blog, you won't be considered a journalist. If you do advocacy journalism for a labor union, you won't be considered a journalist, or an environmental movement. And that's a slippery slope as well. We have to be very careful. We can't allow the government to determine who's a journalist or who isn't. In other words, I think anyone with a blog should have as much right to sit in the White House briefing room as Major Garrett from CBS or some of these other talking heads we have with the news, the television media.
Now, Wayne, you've covered a lot of controversial stories, and when you see the feds haul in a reporter, such as yourself perhaps, demanding to know his sources, does that do more to embolden you to move forward and dig for more information and get it out to the American people, or does it frighten you? Does it cause you to reserve your actions as a journalist?
Well, this is one of the things that depends on who you're talking about. Now, Jim Risen, who I spoke to about this, was willing to go to jail rather than answer questions before a grand jury about who his sources were. And he has a family and kids in college. That's a lot more of a risk he takes and I applauded him for it then, and I applauded him for it now for his principled stance. Myself, because I'm single, oh no, I would challenge the government. I'd be willing to go to jail, no question about it. But I have a lot less at stake than people, for example, who have kids in school and mortgages and things like that.
Now, both WikiLeaks and the James Risen book, State of War, blast the U.S. government for a lot of things that happened under President George W. Bush. Why is President Obama's administration so hard-pressed to silence those who criticize his predecessor? He even ran for office on the premise of correcting Bush's overreach. Why won't the president own up to the facts and stand with the whistleblowers and reporters?
Because Obama's out of the same milieu as the Bush administration. I mean, I've investigated Obama's background, and it's anything but this, poor kid whose mother didn't have much money. He led a very gifted life in Hawaii, and looking at his family background, they had more connections with the CIA than most people. This is Madeline Dunham and Stanley Armour Dunham, and his mom, Stanley Ann Dunham, and his father, Barack Obama Sr., and a whole host of people back then that he dealt with. And so I'm not surprised. And it's not just the Sterling case. It's other cases that were pending in the Bush administration. He kept those investigations going as well. Because when it comes to national security and intelligence matters, we have to recall Obama, one of his first trips as president was to CIA headquarters at Langley, where he told the assembled people there that you don't have to worry about any indictments from my administration on the issue of torture. And we've seen the Obama administration, digging its heels on a whole host of issues about what happened and the abuses back during the Bush administration, including refusing to release the 28 redacted pages from the Senate Intelligence Committee report on the Saudi connection with 9/11. And those 28 pages will show that the current king, the new king of Saudi Arabia, King Salman, was very much involved in funding those 9/11 perpetrators.
Well, Wayne, we're going to have to get into that a little bit deeper in another interview, and we'll have you back on. I know you're working on some other investigations, so we'll have you back on next week to talk about those.
Okay, no problem.
All right, that was former NSA contractor, now investigative journalist Wayne Madsen. You can find out more about him at www.waynemadsenreport.com. Up next, we've got today's special reports lined up, and Amanda Gabriel is standing by to deliver your daily digital report.